Absolutely everything is going wrong for Marathon right now. There is a lot we're going to learn in this video, far more than just the art plagiarism stuff. But what if I told you, because we live in a world where it's very easy for people to just say, stupid devs, don't know nothing, don't care about the players. What if I told you that lots of developers inside Bungie had been advocating for Marathon to have substantial PvE elements, but that they were not listened to? Maybe that is the biggest point of this video. It's what happens when an organization basically goes to shit. Now, I'm going to start with two quotes. The first one, morale is in free fall across all departments. The second quote, the vibes have never been worse. Those are what sources telling Paul Tassi say the plagiarism at Bungie has basically left in the vibes of the studio. People are not happy. Now, this reporting follows, of course, in the wake of the truly uncomfortable stream that saw leadership in the game, well, pilloried by the internet as they tried to defend their response to the plagiarism and, of course, the criticism of the game itself. But the sources do suggest that the problems with Marathon run far deeper than any one individual. Plans have been ruined, feedback is actually worse than many people thought, and if I was a betting man, I think I would put my money on this game being delayed. There's another fun thing going on. Vercel's V0 and every no-code tool on Earth have empowered a whole generation of vibe coders. I'm sure you've heard the word. My editors are now making internal tools for our team that previously I need an engineer for. That's awesome, but there's a dragon. It's called Backend, and my sponsor, Boot.dev, exists to help you slay that dragon. And I'm not even being cheesy. Boot.dev is all themed and built as a role-playing game. It's made by a gamer for fellow gamers, and it fits my weaknesses. Coming from C# game development and like my education and background, front end has always been kind of easy mode and intuitive, but wiring databases, doing auth, all that stuff feels like obscure wizardry. That's why I swear by Boot.dev. Lane and the team have baked the fun of an RPG, so quests, XP, a guild-style Discord that is super active, into a curriculum that's laser-focused on serious back-end chops. So I'm talking about things like actually understanding data structures, API, auth flows, algorithms, Docker, the whole works. You'll build and deploy a server client Pokedex, remake asteroids in Pygame. You'll even tackle job search preparation. Basically, as much fun as vibe coding can be, it does skip a bunch of steps that you really should take, and Boot absolutely sorts that. So no more tutorial hell, no more pricey bootcamp hustle stuff, just a structured path that turns all that vibe coding energy into viable engineering that you can actually depend on. And Boot keeps on adding features like, say, the searchable spellbook and constant new content drops, like, for an example, the massive TypeScript module. Pretty huge, and there's a hack to save even more money. If you go to boot.dev/Bellular News, code Bellular News gets you 25% off your first purchase. So buy the yearly plan for the largest saving, and if you don't gel with it, don't worry, because there's a no-risk 30-day money-back guarantee. Bungie was supposed to run a stream on May 9th with Marathon game director Joe Ziegler discussing the reaction to the closed alpha. It was then delayed until May 16th. And that delay, well, it really did cue things up in terms of the news cycle. It was very costly. You see, the plagiarism allegations and confirmations happened before that stream, and that meant it was an open question as to whether the stream would even happen. But no, it did happen, and it probably shouldn't have. The stream opened with Ziegler and art director Joseph Cross explaining that they had intended to show a lot more new stuff about Marathon. It seems that they had plans to highlight changes based on alpha feedback, but they, of course, in this stream, showed absolutely no gameplay for the full hour. They couldn't until the plagiarized assets had been reviewed and stripped out of the game. And of course, the big worry is, the more that they show, the more that people could scrutinize. Cross opened by reading from a statement, and this is what it basically said. This was plagiarism by one artist who worked on pre-production in 2020. It was then placed on a decal sheet. That's how Anti-Real's art got there, according to the company statement and what Joe said. Now, that decal sheet was then used in production according to them. It was not caught, but now the review process is being updated across Bungie to stop the problem from happening again. As for fixing the problem, steps in the last 24 hours, as of the stream, included reaching out to Anti-Real, auditing all of the unnamed artist's previous work, basically meaning that no new footage can be shown until that is done, then removing anything that is questionably sourced from any asset. He then went on to describe the hundreds of internal and external artists who have worked in this game over the last 5 years. He emphasized that external partners were not involved in this one, likely because of some early connections being drawn by the public. Cross then offered a personal public apology to Anti-Real to make this right. After all of that then, the stream moved on to dealing with the response to the alpha, and I'll get to that shortly, especially the stuff that is being said by Paul Tassie's sources, because they are quite worrying. But overall, what Cross said here essentially reflects the same position that Bungie took with their first statement, right? There's a little bit more detail here, but nothing major, nothing new, and I'd say that until this audit is complete, we likely won't have any more info on this. The reactions, obviously, were not great. Now, we weren't at Nintendo Stream Chat levels of spamming things, but audiences consistently left absolutely brutal messages, ones that the hosts were clearly reading. You could see it in their faces. Messages, of course, demanding the game is cancelled, and of course, the mimetic plagiarism will make you god riffings, Cross especially just, well, facing calls of, being fired. Lots of people saying Art Raiders, which is, of course, a little bit of a play on one of their major points of competition, a game called Arc Raiders that, funnily enough, even though it also moved from being PvE to PvP, actually has had very positive buzz recently. Anyway, all of this might have been made worse by the format of the stream itself. You see, Bungie had previously gotten a lot of fan sympathy out of just how low-tech their streams were, that it was just people talking to the camera. As the late Susan of YouTube would say, it was less polish, more texture. That's generally what people want. It's just that here it absolutely did hit different. It still is a very humanizing way of doing a presentation like this, but in this case, well, they had a far wider audience than they normally would. The situation is altogether much more serious. Expectations were higher. This was all made worse by tech issues. Audio desyncing was a real problem. Discord questions from the public were only fed towards Ziegler, who was clearly the only one who was planned to be there originally. This then left Joe Cross basically on camera being relayed questions like why Anti-Real isn't being hired just to make use of the assets, and comments doing things like asking why they stole Anti-Real's style. So all of this is rough. It added to a deeply miserable environment, one where the most senior leadership in this game couldn't even show the game off. They couldn't really do anything in the way of show, don't tell, because it was just so lo-fi. And that's just the leadership, because where things really get interesting is when we go and see what's happening in the rank and file. Paul Tassie's sources have been quick to describe how things are going inside the studio, and man, it is not a pretty picture. They suggest the internal explanation for the plagiarism is exactly the same as the public one, so no new real information on that, but more importantly, both Sony and Bungie Legal are now investigating the whole situation. And on the ground, staff are deeply worried here, and that's because plagiarism is only one part of the conversation. I think what's potentially more dangerous for them is all of this buzz about the plagiarism means that every little detail is going to be picked up on, more sources will talk, and that's why we now have to talk about Marathon as a video game. I'm going to quote from Paul's reporting. Everyone has the same concerns about what happens to Bungie as a studio if Marathon bombs, which is something they absolutely cannot afford. Sticking with the report, Tassie's sources say that they're not aware of any plans to delay Marathon past its September release date. That seems kind of insane if you ask me, and it's perhaps because changes were already in place before the plagiarism controversy began. So, as the month of May started, Bungie had, quote, pulled the plug on their planned marketing in order to counter the narrative that had came up in response. Basically, the plagiarism controversy has just simply increased the need to delay things, and they've already delayed and canned some of their marketing. As such, a single public beta in August could now become a, quote, roadmap of public tests, which would likely open up the game long-term to global audiences rather than just the people in the US who have gotten to play it so far. Now, if we were to assume that May is being written off to rebuild their marketing plan, that means that Bungie and Sony have about 3 months to audit and replace any offending art assets. Meanwhile, of course, they'd also have to relaunch the game's reputation and get it in front of audiences, because the initial reveal that happened this year did not go well. That means this is all shaping up to be quite disastrous, and they're doing all of this ahead of a September release date that is across all major platforms. Doing all of this stuff simultaneously, if you ask me, seems completely unfeasible. I mean, even if Marathon was universally hyped, that would still be an ambitious goal, like with your team locked in and motivated. But for Marathon right now, that feels honestly impossible to reach. But the most revealing information from Tassie's sources might actually be about the creation of Marathon, not the release of Marathon. And it might even explain why the gameplay critiques from the alpha aren't actually dealing with the most major complaints, which are things like proximity chat, PvE, solo modes, and loads of other things. Essentially, there's a very clear vision for this game, and it was set in stone a long time ago. Marathon was originally pitched by the good old boy higher-ups of Bungie leadership, and as far back as 5 years ago, devs were telling them that it would and wouldn't work, and often were ignored. Many have said previously that it needed to have some sort of PvE component. And I think that last line will really ring true for a lot of you watching this video. It's pretty much been the big thing people have been saying. It's nice to know that, at least internally in the studio, a lot of people seem to have agreed. Now, overall, this is a story we have heard many times before at many different studios. Sometimes a singular vision is about delivering you a Kojima-style experience. Sometimes it's not. And in this story, we know that Marathon's former game director, Christopher Barrett, left Bungie in the middle of 2023 after more than 20 years at the company. Now, this came after a HR investigation that accused him of inappropriate behavior. He does maintain his innocence, and he sued Bungie for the payout that he was owed for his stocks. But there are certainly some things that he said that do, let's just say, not really look like professional speech. Now, his tenure alone likely would have placed him in that good old boy group that is being talked about by Paul Tassi and I suppose the sources within the company that he's been able to reach. And it would go a long way to explaining the game framework and direction that the team have been left to work on in these past 2 years, which of course is well beyond the game's initially planned launch. Yeah, Marathon is really late. Remember, this game was greenlit under very, very different financial circumstances. There's a popular belief, right, that Marathon is part of PlayStation's live service push. But the thing is, Bungie was acquired in 2022. Marathon was started in 2019, and 2019 is also when Bungie broke off their publishing arrangement with Activision for Destiny, and they were finally way more independent. Now, we know from Activision leadership that Bungie was consistently having to lean on Activision support studios, High Moon and Vicarious Visions, to deliver expansions and content. Basically, it didn't make Activision enough money. Bungie's stuff was eating into their resources. Then, with Bungie out on their own, they presumably decided to invest in another revenue stream while they could afford it, and that, of course, would be Marathon. Now, this was before Destiny 2's commercial high point with the Witch Queen expansion. When Barrett's departure was reported, IGN also claimed that staff expected, quote, senior company leadership to leave in droves when the 2026 stock vestments clear from the PlayStation acquisition. And that's basically the thing. A lot of them, it seems, are just playing for time until they can escape with a shitload of money. Now, that's the same leadership who dismissed executive pay cuts by saying that Bungie weren't, to quote them, that type of company, because, you know, fuck solidarity with your workers, you don't need morale to make a game, I guess. Bungie and Sony then put aside $1.3 billion for staff retention back in 2022, with 2/3 of that expected to be paid out within the first 2 years. That still, of course, does leave hundreds of millions of dollars to vest for an ever-dwindling number of staff. Now, we know that the rank and file of Bungie care about this game, and it seems reasonable to extend that grace to people like Ziegler and Cross as well, right, as the public faces of it. But I think the real question is, do leadership, you know, the highest tier of leadership at Bungie, care about Marathon? Do they even care about the continued existence of Bungie outside of having to only meet their obligations towards PlayStation so they don't get fired, and so that in 2026 their options vest and they become extremely wealthy and, you know, no longer, let's just say, tied to Bungie for their own financial success and security? Certainly, it doesn't feel like they care about the long haul. And remember, this situation has got so bad that PlayStation have taken leadership to task in recent years for overspending and missing deliveries. But not internally. Not like some PlayStation exec saying in an email, you guys are really, really dragging. No. They said this in a public earnings statement. So for the leadership of a business unit to be called out in the quarterly report, like talk, that is absolutely shocking. It is not a normal thing. So all of that's been going to shit. There have been rounds and rounds of layoffs, and what might shock you is those layoffs likely could have been way worse. I say that because the wider PlayStation group have actually been salvaging incubation projects done at Bungie and support teams that otherwise likely would have been laid off. Marathon's launch has been in the middle of all of this. It feels an awful lot like leadership protecting themselves and setting staff up to take the fall here. Because realistically, as long as they're able to stay until their stuff vests, they will be just fine. And while I'm usually the type to give the benefit of the doubt, and that is something I'll extend to Ziegler and Joe Cross, I mean, It's obvious that Joe Cross hasn't just yanked all of Anti-Real's work. You just have to look at what Joe Cross himself has made as an artist, like say 13 years ago. I'll extend the benefit of the doubt to those guys, but to the top leadership, to the people who are actually making the impactful calls here at Bungie, no longer can I give them the benefit of the doubt. It has been nothing but just fuck up after fuck up after fuck up. And even their wins, even the wins that team have been able to get under extremely challenging circumstances, well, those have been rewarded with layoffs. It's a bad situation. I don't see this ending well. I think Marathon has absolutely got to be delayed. It just does not seem like they're going to be able to get the ball rolling. And a lot of the point too is, it's not like the feedback from the alpha has been particularly stellar. It seems that even without the plagiarism stuff going on, this game would still be facing a hell of a lot of struggle.